Okay, Amanda, so excited to have you on the podcast. I think it's just really cool that we have all these connections behind the scenes. You know, my little sister, Allie, and she's actually played a big part in me getting this podcast started because she's just really good at, technical stuff. And then I know your mom, which is so
yeah.
and your mom and my dad are really good friends. So my dad, he's always talked so highly of your mom. So
it's great. She is great.
She is amazing. Power woman. So
yeah.
But yeah, I am so excited to hear your story. I think one of the cool connections is that you work with the Uplift Community of Faith with Leo, who was recently on the podcast, and his episode was so powerful. So I'd love to hear a little bit about you, kind of what your involvement is in Uplift Community of Faith, and then just a little bit of background on you.
Okay. All right. So my name's Amanda Freebaron. I live in Mesa, and I grew up in Southern Utah. I'm married. I've been married for about 7 or 8 years, and I have 3 children. Like you said, I work with Leo Weiniger and a really great team in a Facebook faith crisis support group called Uplift Community of Faith. So I do a lot of kind of the back end stuff, admitting people into the group and posting posts and that sort of thing. But it's a group that, as Leo talked about a couple weeks ago, really kind of tries to find the sweet spot between being able to welcome people's questions and struggles and frustrations without allowing a lot of the distracting anger and noise, so that as people work through those questions, they can do that with the Spirit, have an environment like an online community where we can have the Spirit and not just kind of be combative or constantly have a lot of the kind of anger and cynicism that tends to develop in faith crisis communities online. I've been involved with that for a couple of years now, and I actually got involved with the group when I was struggling with my own faith crisis, which we'll talk about today.
Awesome. Well, I think that group is so needed. I think that, as we were just talking before we started recording, it's so loud right now. And, I think you're exactly right. We need that support and that community for people to be able to ask questions and get answers with a lens of faith. And so what you were doing is so needed and so powerful. So thank you so much for doing that. It's awesome. So, well, cool. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? You can just, start wherever you want from the beginning, okay. All the things. So.
Okay. All right, great. So I grew up, my parents actually joined the church when I was 7 or 8 years old. So my mom had grown up in Mesa, so she had been kind of around the church and she was pretty familiar with it. Her dad was Jewish and her mom was sort of somewhat Protestant, but she didn't really grow up going to church a lot. His dad had been a member of the church, but had kind of left when he was a teenager. But my dad didn't really have much familiarity with the church. And so, but when they had kids, they felt like they needed to be raising their kids in a church. And so they started looking for churches. I kind of marginally remember attending different churches when I was young, as my parents kind of embarked on this figuring out journey. And one day my dad found an ad, I think in the newspaper. He found an ad in the newspaper for the LDS church. And he mentioned it to my mom, and my mom said, well, I don't know if they're pretty strict. But they went anyway, and didn't go to any more churches after that. And we kept going. We at the time we lived in Arizona, but pretty shortly after that, we moved to Southern Utah. We had, we were raised in the church, but my parents, like I said, were converts. We kind of sometimes were active. The different kids, there were 5 of us, we kind of did different things. And by the time I was went to college. I had kind of, I just wasn't going that much. It wasn't that I was struggling with faith or that I was having big issues with any of the commandments. I just wasn't kind of too interested in that. I always figured, yeah, it's probably true, but I'll figure that out when I'm a little older. I'm not super interested in going right now. So I had a lot of LDS friends that I lived with, and a lot of good influences when I went away to college at SUU, but I wasn't super involved for a few years. I went to church occasionally. After a couple of years being away at college, I kind of started having some mental health issues, and I ended up going home, taking some time off college and just trying to figure out. I didn't like my major. I didn't like what I was doing. I just kind of needed some take a break times. So I moved back home with my parents, and was just kind of working, hanging out, trying to figure stuff out. And one weekend I went up to Salt Lake City, and just to see some friends, to hang out with some friends. And I decided before I drove back down to St. George that I would stop at the temple grounds. And I hadn't been to a temple on temple grounds in years. But I just thought, oh, I'll stop by and see the temple. It's so pretty. And I went, and I just kind of sat there on a bench. I watched the sister missionaries giving tours and talking to people who were learning about the church. And I had this overwhelming feeling that needed to be me, that I needed to be serving a mission. And I said, that's crazy. I don't even know the last time I went to church. But I just stayed there for a little bit longer, and I kept having that feeling over and over again. And I prayed, and I said, is this really, am I just going crazy? But I felt that so strongly that when I, got in my car and started driving back to St. George, I called my mom and said, Mom, I think I'm supposed to go on a mission. And she said, well, okay, let's get it figured out. And so I went home, and I started going back to church. I just barely started a new job. I had started dating a guy who wasn't LDS. But I just kind of pulled it together and got myself on a mission. I was not the most prepared missionary ever, but we talked earlier about focusing on the miracles. That was kind of my first miracle in the life of my faith, where that was an impression, and I had never had that clear and distinctive an impression before. So I got ready for my mission. I left on a mission, and I served in Toronto, Canada, and it was wonderful. Like I said, I wasn't the most prepared missionary ever. It wasn't something I had ever planned on doing. So I had a little bit of a rough adjustment, but by the end of my mission, I had really kind of gotten used to the discipline and the obedience, and really felt like I had a firm testimony, and I was really happy on my mission. And when I returned home, I just I had nothing but the most wonderful experience of me coming closer to Christ and meeting all of these people who really just, people say it all the time, but the people that I met and that I taught, they helped me feel Christ's love so much. They taught me and they served me, and it was amazing. So I got home from mission. Within a couple of years, I had met my husband, gotten married. We had our first baby, like a year after we were married. Our first baby was born. And then right after that, I graduated finally from college. And so it was kind of a lot in a really little period of time. I had kind of waffled for my first couple of years of adulthood. And then all of a sudden, like, my adulthood fast forwarded. And so my husband and I both graduated from school. At this point, I was 27, and he got a job in Arizona some of my family had moved back down to Arizona. So we moved down here, and all of a sudden, like I said, I had kind of had this extended YSA age period for like almost 10 years. And then now I'm like, my husband's at work all day. We have one car. So I get up, I drive him to work. I come home, I'm with one toddler all day. I'm in this apartment complex by myself. There's like no other members of the church, no other young moms in my apartment complex. And it was a real big adjustment.
That's hard.
That's hard. It was hard. It was hard. The new mom thing is hard. The stay-at-home mom thing is hard. And I started really struggling with a lot of depression. I didn't recognize it at the time because that wasn't an experience I'd ever had, but I was super depressed. And with that depression started coming like distance from God. I kind of stopped praying very much. I didn't study the scriptures. I kept going to church, but I just wasn't feeling it. I wasn't feeling God in my life. And as that depression kind of sank in, as I started feeling I was unhappy in my ward. It was the first time I'd ever been in a family ward, and I'm in a ward with all these big families, and most of the people are like in their 40s, and I don't have friends, and they're all so nice and lovely people, but it just I wasn't clicking in. And so I was unhappy with my ward. I was unhappy with just my faith in the church in general. And around that same time was when I started to see a lot of friends that I knew, mission companions, mission people, posting a lot of stuff on social media, criticism of the church. And that didn't help. That stuff started sticking with me as, I had felt a distance from God. That was kind of sticking with me. And some of it, luckily, a lot of the church history stuff that people struggle with. My dad is a big history buff. I like to read. And so a lot of the stuff that people are just like finding out when they start a faith crisis, like I already knew, and that was good. But some of the other things maybe I didn't know, or maybe I just sort of struggled with. I struggled with polygamy and women in the priesthood and a lot of the stuff that women typically struggle with. And I started thinking about those things more and more and more often. And then I don't really know when it happened, but I just kind of realized that I didn't really think I believed any of it anymore. I wasn't sure if there was God at all. And maybe it was just all such like too good to be true. If it was right, then what a great story it is. And maybe people just made this up to feel better about life because life is really hard. And of course, now saying this out loud, that sounds like depression, right?
Right.
I didn't know that. I thought I was just, I was just thinking through things for the first time in my life. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty mentally checked out. I went to church with my husband. I had a calling teaching young women. I would just I would do it, but I felt a little bit uncomfortable. And I got to the point where I was like, I think I need to I need to tell my bishop, I need to tell my husband, I don't know where I'm at anymore. So that was kind of the worst. That was the worst part of it. And then at that point I had to figure out, okay, well, what am I going to do?
You end up telling your husband and your bishop?
I did. With my husband, it was kind of just, it wasn't like, I didn't ever have like a sit down talk with him where I was like, look, I don't believe it anymore. It was more, I kind of talked to him a little bit. I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that. And then finally it was like, I don't know if I can stick this out. And he, was wonderful and supportive. But he, of course wanted me to stick it out, and would send me sort of podcasts and send me anything that he could find, to kind of help me look for general conference talks to send me that I could listen to, help me with, encouraging me with my scripture study and everything. So he was really supportive.
Do you think that helped? Like him sending you that stuff, do you think it was helpful, or do you think you were kind of like, were you seeing that stuff with a different lens after the headspace you were in, or what was that like?
It kind of depended, honestly, on the day. Sometimes I was like, you're not going to fix me. Like, you can't fix me. And then other times there would be things that would help. I know you've mentioned that you're going to have Don Bradley on your podcast, right?
Yeah.
I had my husband one time just came across a profile, I think in the Deseret News or something, about Don Bradley and his journey through faith and his return to the church. And my husband had sent me that, and I was like, oh, like, okay,
So
all right, like
inspiring, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Salt Lake Tribune, actually, which is interesting because they're some of the
it's
things
not usually the place that you get for pro-church
exactly. But that article is incredible. And this is kind of a side note, but I have to tell you really quick. I recently listened to another podcast. I think it was actually Fair that did the podcast, but he went into detail about how just some of the similar, like he was out because of some of the things that he saw with like the temple and things like that. But then he dove deeper into his research. And when he dove deeper into it, because he was writing his book, and so he was out, he took his records off, but he was still working on his book. And hopefully I don't need to fact check myself here, but from my memory, this is what I'm remembering. It said that he was out, but he was still working on his book. And so he was, still doing the research and things like that. And then he found these similarities and with the temple and the Book of Mormon, and just put these puzzle pieces together. And it was so good. I'm going to send you the link to that after we hop off, because I called my mom immediately after, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because we had just been talking about, it was after Jasmine was on the podcast talking about, some people have questions about the Freemason and the temple, and his just putting those pieces together with that, and in the Book of Mormon and the brother of Jared, and just all of these things that he mentioned blew my mind, and it was so cool. And so I'm gonna have to send you that. But anyway, sorry, that was a total hiatus off of our story here. But so go ahead, continue.
No, I love that, because it kind of, as I was preparing for today, I was kind of thinking about what are some of the things that I like learned going through this journey. And one of the things is, you think you know so much when you know this much. Yep. It's like you go through kind of your childhood and your adolescence, and about, a little teeny tiny bit. And then when you get to be a little bit older, you learn a little bit more. And all of a sudden you think you know everything, and you don't know everything. And there are people, and there are books, and there's so much that you don't know. And when you get to that point where it's like, okay, I'm a young adult, I need to take care of my faith for myself. There's so much to dive into. There are so many smart people and amazing books, and so many people asking the same questions that you're asking. They've asked these questions for hundreds and thousands of years. Right. And so I think of myself being so arrogant, thinking, back that, oh, am I I'm the only person who's ever thought of this problem that I have with the church. And of course, that's not true at all. There's still so much to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So you asked me about my bishop. I did talk to my bishop too. And I know that not all of these experiences are the same, but my experience ended up being really wonderful. I talked to him. I just told him, I don't know if I believe anything anymore. And he talked to me. He gave me encouragement, and he didn't accuse me of sinning or being a terrible person or not reading my scriptures enough, which I was not reading my scriptures enough, but he just told me, you know what, I know that there are a lot of people who are concerned with these issues, especially right now, but honestly, many of these questions people have had for a long time. And the best thing that I can tell you is to both try to seek the Spirit, and also seek out good information from scholars. And he kind of talked to me about how, you know, I might know a little bit, but there's still a lot more to know and a lot of wise people to consult and a lot of books to read. And so he was very supportive. I asked him, you know, should I keep doing my calling? And he said he thought it would be a good idea if I was comfortable to keep doing my calling, because as I was a young women advisor, so I would teach young women I think once a month. And so as I was preparing for those lessons, he thought it would be a good opportunity for me to be studying. And he said, you know, if there's anything that you're struggling with in particular in the lesson, you know, you can always invite another leader to share their testimony instead. I don't want you to ever feel like you have to be dishonest. So he was really supportive in that way. And I decided, okay, yes, I will keep doing this. And that was a real turning point for me that night, because then I was like, okay, yes, I am going to try this. I'm going to try to stick it out. And after I kind of made that decision, I remember driving home from that meeting with the bishop, and just I had some hymns on, and I was crying and I was overwhelmed, and I was like, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try to stick this out. And I'm so grateful that I did, because that was when the next round of miracles started, I think. So I mean, one of the first miracles was that I kind of started first of all, I started being able to get through my scripture study and prayers in a way that I could focus, and my brain wasn't always going crazy with distractions and things that I was upset about. I noticed a real kind of clarity of mind that hadn't been there before. So that was really, really great. That made a difference. The next thing that I was a wonderful miracle was that I was on YouTube, just kind of listening to, I think I was listening to maybe a fair conference or something. And I came across on an autoplay, there was an interview, and it was this guy named Leo Winiger, who was just starting a Facebook group and called Uplift, and it was a faith crisis support group. And he was doing this video interviewing Dan Peterson, who was a professor at BYU at the time. They were talking about people struggling with the church. They were talking about apologetics. It was really interesting. And so I thought, well, I should probably, I'm on Facebook, I should probably try to find this group. And so I found the group and joined, and I found that it was really different from the other online spaces where people were talking about faith crisis, where it was mostly just people saying, I can't do this anymore. I hate this. I hate that. I want to try. I'm struggling with this, but I do want to regain my faith. And that was huge for me. So that was another big miracle that I found.
Did you, before you talked to your bishop, were you kind of really spending a lot of time online, in those communities, or what was your experience like with those communities? Were you participating in the conversation surrounding faith crisis? We were talking about how, TikTok and other places, and also just people that we know that, and we're, obviously I know that you're not here, or me either, here to invalidate anybody's journey, that chooses to leave. But, I know that we've both seen a lot of people that are close to us and friends and family and leave the church, and they share all of their reasons why they left. And it can really hurt, and it really stings, and it can kind of create this spiral inside, why, what is it they're thinking? And so anyway, I'm just curious to know, what was your involvement like with those communities and all of that?
That's a super great question. So there were some communities that I had joined, mostly other Facebook groups. I know that ex-Mormon Reddit is a big one for some people. That was one that I had gotten on a few times and just felt like this isn't the place for me. I don't feel like this is really very helpful. But there were some sort of groups that, might be referred to as sort of exit groups that kind of encourage people to leave the church, groups for people who were attending but kind of mentally out, that I was in. I didn't find myself participating in the groups a lot. For some reason, I just kind of always, I don't know what it was that I was blessed kind of with this spirit, but I just kind of always intuited like this isn't for me. I'm not feeling good here. This isn't what I'm looking for. Plenty of nice people who are there trying to help and support and help people find community, because when you do leave the church, it can be scary. You feel like you don't have a community anymore. And so plenty of these people are wonderful people trying to be supportive, but I just kind of felt like this isn't what I'm looking for. Although I was still there and those things were still weighing down on me. And it took me a while to say, okay, no more of this. I know that this isn't making me feel good. I've just got to leave it all. And eventually I was kind of able to do that.
Awesome. So you're continuing in Young Women's. You are, you're feeling kind of, you still don't know, but you have this experience with the bishop that's kind of, motivating you to keep going. So what happened after that?
So the next general conference, after kind of all this was going on, this would have been, I think, April of 2018. So this was President Nelson's first conference as being, when he was sustained as the president of the church. I was really, at this point, this was after I had made the decision, okay, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna give this thing at least like till the end of the year, give it some time, because if it is true, it's worth trying. So I was watching General Conference. I was taking it very seriously. I was like, this is going to be the conference. It's going to be life-changing. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to feel the spirit. And I watched conference, and most of the time I just kind of felt stressed and numb, and I didn't feel what I was expecting, and I might have just overhyped myself, or I was feeling like that sludge of depression or what it was, but it was not great for me. Even though now I've looked back and rewatched those talks and reread them, and there wasn't anything in particular that wasn't absolutely as wonderful as conference always is, but I just wasn't in a good place. And so we got through all the sessions of conference until the very last session of conference. In that very last talk where President Nelson was doing his first kind of farewell to conference and announcing temples. And I was grumpy. I was in the kitchen kind of getting ready for dinner. I was mad that I was feeling like this was going to be a big turning point for me, and it just hasn't been. But I'm still listening and watching him. And while he was announcing the temples, I just felt an overwhelming rush of a feeling of love that I had never in my whole life felt. And it was a lot. It was a lot of feelings. And I just collapsed to the floor, which sounds so dramatic, but I just fell to the floor because I just felt all of the weight of everything that had been going on just kind of lifted, and I felt wrapped up in love. And I knew that God was telling me that I was doing the right thing. And I also knew that I needed to take President Nelson seriously, that I needed to be listening to his teachings, because God was telling me that this is who you should be following right now. This is a prophet. And it's one of those things still that I cling to on my bad days, because I don't have any other way of describing that experience other than complete feeling of God's love.
Wow. It's amazing.
So after that, I had been involved in this group Uplift for a little bit, and I got a message from one of the admins in the group saying, hey, we've noticed that you've been participating. We need we need actually some help moderating the group. Would you like to help out a little bit? And I was like, well, I'm still working through a lot of these things that I'm struggling with. Oh, that's okay. Everybody on the team's kind of in different places, but as long as you're on board with the mission of the group, we'd love your help. And I said, okay, all right, I'll help out a little bit. And I helped out a little bit. And as I was doing that, I kept sticking with I was listening to conference talks, and I was listening to old fair talks, and I was reading my scriptures, and I noticed that I was experiencing that sort of Alma 32 promise where it's starting to feel good. And I just, I started out with that desire to believe, and I can feel it feeling good. And I'm feeling excited. And I felt like that was a real fulfillment of the scriptures in my life, where I just, I was starting to love the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as I did that, as I put my faith in him, as I stuck out on the hard days, I found myself getting little impressions of the things that I had been struggling with, being led to read this or that scripture or ensign article or whatever that would kind of help my thinking in the right direction. Direct me to some good books. I just kept getting impression upon impression, and they were little, but I learned to listen. And after, that by that end of that year that I said, God, I'm going to give you till the end of the year at least, I felt like, okay, yeah, I believe this. I'm not totally sure about everything, but I believe it. And ever since then, it's just been just this amazing, I've had all these amazing opportunities to have some questions answered. Others of them realize, okay, maybe just that's not something that I need to figure out, but the weight of this testimony that I have lets me just kind of set that question to the side for now. And I feel like I really can say that I love the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Wow. That is so incredible. And I love how you talk about how they just came little by little. It's not like, when we have these questions, it's like, it's not, the answers don't come that satisfy in a worldly way. It's not like, okay, I have this question about polygamy or whatever, and I'm going to get on Google and find the answer. It doesn't work like that. It's like the answers that we have, they come in a spiritual sense, and it's a peace, and it's something that, it's not like of this world. And so I just love how you described that, these things came little by little, and it wasn't just some overnight thing. So I have a couple questions for you, if you're open to some questions.
Yes, of course.
We have just some people on Instagram that have submitted some questions. How can a parent help a child who is away without making them feel judged? Or, what advice would you have for a parent?
So one of the things that I would say, it's really easy on both ends to presume judgment. So it's really easy whether you're the person who's struggling with faith or the person that is not struggling with faith and wanting to support that person. Like, this person doesn't like me, this person is judging me, this is going to impact our relationship in some way. And so for both sides, I would say make sure that you're really nurturing that relationship first. And that way, you can open it up for discussion, but everybody's got to feel comfortable in that relationship first before. And so nitpicking, correcting, misreading kind of intent where she might have given me a dirty look. Was she giving me a dirty look because I'm drinking coffee, or was she giving me, not really giving me a dirty look at all? Or on the opposite side as well, is she judging me? Is she mad at me because because I'm listening to conference or whatever it is? Just assume the best of each other, and try to nurture that relationship first, I think is the most important. And I think also asking a lot of questions, asking you, what are you comfortable with right now? What do you, would you, I have some books that I think have really helped me. Would you be comfortable with me sharing those things with you right now? What are you looking for? What can I do to love and support you? And I think, again, those questions need to be both sides as well. What can I do? Mom, I'm struggling. Maybe I'm not going to church right now, but what can I do to make sure you know that I love you and that I'm trying to figure this out? So both sides.
I love that. That is such a good answer. It's like, when we're facing these really hard things, it's so important to make sure that your bond with that person is coming first. That's the priority. Your relationship is the priority. And then we can start talking about the heavy stuff.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Yes, please.
Sorry.
Do.
I would just add in, you asked, the question was about a parent and a child, but I want to add one thing for spouses. One thing that really helped us was, because my husband didn't sometimes you see spouses going through this together. My husband didn't really. There were a lot of reasons why he wasn't as necessarily up and down, and he can kind of tolerate questions a lot better than I can. But one thing that we really made it a priority was, like, we would go on a date every other week without our daughter. She was with a babysitter, and we would not talk about church stuff. We worked on our relationship and we were happy. And if I was feeling crappy about the faith situation, I sucked it up. And if he was feeling crappy about the situation, he would suck it up too, because our relationship, our marriage was still really, really important. And if you let that one trial suck up all your whole relationship, it really can go sour.
That is great advice. I love that so much. Do you have any doubts or concerns that still bother you today?
I have things that are questions that I haven't received answers to, but right now I'm not feeling like I would categorize them as doubts, because I'm comfortable with hearing those questions. People use the word doubt in different ways. And so, but I'm okay with the questions that I have, but none of the questions that I have right now lead me to, for example, like question President Nelson's authority or question what I need to be doing to keep my covenants, that sort of thing.
I love that. I think when I asked Leo that, I asked him, because his story was, he knows very much everything that the ex-Mormon community is saying about the church, all of their concerns, all of those things. And, he's dove into every single thing you can see on the internet. And when I asked him if he has any doubts or concerns that bother him, and he was thinking, he's like, no, I don't. And I love that, what this says to me is that, it's okay to go through a season where you aren't sure about things. It's okay. And then this leads me to my next question, which is, are you grateful that you went through this? Do you feel like your testimony is stronger on this other side of coming through this? Or do you feel like, wow, that was really hard? Like if I could go back and take that back, I would.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for it. I think that it's not a coincidence that we see a lot of people sort of our age or a little bit younger going through these struggles kind of at a higher proportion than you would see someone, say, in their 40s or 50s, because it's a period, it's a time where like you're really experiencing a lot of changes, a shift in like having to take on a lot more responsibility in your life. And it's a time of a lot of maturity happening. And so I think that for me, it was just kind of part of my growing up. I don't think that God foreordained me to have a faith crisis, but I do think that I needed some maturing, and it was kind of inevitable. And now I'm so grateful for it because, you know, like I said, I have hard things in my life. In fact, as you get older, you tend to accumulate more hard things. And I would say definitely my life has a lot more challenges now than it did when I first experienced my faith crisis. And so, but because I am more tethered to my Savior, I can tough through those things. I can tough through them with faith. And I don't have the thoughts of, you know, God can't possibly exist if I'm going through X problem.
Yeah, totally. I love that. And I think that, you know, sometimes when we have these questions of, you know, that are hard and they challenge our faith, it's like, we think, oh my gosh, crap. Like, I don't think I can ever get through this. Like, I mentioned in another episode about how I had this little experience with polygamy. I was reading the Saints book and I saw something about polygamy that was just like, it sent me in a weird place. Like, I was just like, I don't get this. Like, I don't know how I'm ever going to get over this. And it made me feel a certain way that I was just like, I didn't like it. And you know, I went to my dad and I talked to him about it, and he really talked me through it and brought out one of my great grandma's journals who lived polygamy and her experience and her testimony coming through it. And it's like, I saw it with new eyes, and now I'm not, polygamy isn't an issue for me anymore. It's just not. And at the time I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how I'm going to get past this, you know, but because of that experience and that question that I had and having to work through it, it made my testimony stronger. And it helped me to realize that challenges and questions, and if we seek answers that are true and right, and we ask God to give us those answers, it can be a testimony builder for us, and we can come out on the other side stronger than we were before. So I love that. I love your response to that. What advice do you have for people who are unsure the church is true?
My biggest advice would be just to recognize that faith is not supposed to be easy, and to kind of prepare yourself, be okay with going through a difficult journey. If it's okay, I wanted to share a little quote that I really love.
Please do.
So this is so faith is like, faith makes our burdens light, but faith itself is not necessarily something that is easy or is light. And there's this quote that I really love. It's from Flannery O'Connor, and she was a Catholic writer, and she said, "What people don't realize is how much religion costs. They think faith is a big electric blanket, when of course it is the cross. It is much harder to believe than not to believe. If you feel you can't believe, you must at least do this. Keep an open mind, keep it open toward faith, keep wanting it, keep asking for it, and leave the rest to God."
Wow.
So I love that. I love that quote. I love, and she talked about in her writing how the hardest thing is to not believe and to want to believe, that can be the hardest trial in life. And it is hard. It is hard, but I have a testimony, a strong testimony, that it is worth it if you can stick through it. You might not get all the answers to be exactly the way that you want them. If you're insisting on, I want my faith back, but I want to hang on to my belief about X. I need to believe that, President Nelson is wrong about this, or the scriptures are wrong about this, and I still want my faith back. You don't have the right attitude. It's not going to work. But if you're willing to do the hard work, to be humble and to listen, you can make it through, and God loves you and he wants you to make it through. But you have to be humble and you have to be willing to work.
Yes, I love that so much. And what was coming to my mind when you were saying that was the scripture that talks about having the desire to believe and let that desire work in you. And I mean, we don't have to know or have perfect faith to, have that desire, but if you're turning to the right resources and you're like open to answers that might not be exactly what you're wanting, but answers that will bring peace, I think that it can be, it will grow and it will become good. So I love that. That quote was awesome. And if I would love to share that with listeners. So if you can send that to me, that'd be awesome.
Yes, I will. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but one of the questions is, what was the turning point to make you want to return?
I think just meeting with my bishop, talking with my husband, and being okay with understanding that I had people there for me, and then it was okay where I was at, and it was okay that I needed some time to figure it out. I had a support system. And I think that's what made a big difference. And I would really encourage people. I know there's always a horror story online about someone. I talked to my husband about my faith crisis, or I talked to my bishop or my Relief Society president. They said the nastiest thing or whatever. I don't think that's the majority of cases. I think that sometimes people can say things that we might read as judgmental because we're in a tough emotional state or whatever. But I think most of the time, if you're willing to open up to someone, that's a really good start in a good direction. And I would say, as crazy as this sounds, because I do faith crisis support online, I would say open up to someone in person. Open up to someone that you trust in person, whether that's a family member or a friend or a bishop or a Relief Society president or whatever. Talk to someone in person so that there's someone who knows what you're going through, who loves you, who's going to text you and say, hey, just checking on you, whatever. But if nobody knows what you're going through, it's going to be a lot heavier. And I'm sure that there's someone you have in your life who will help you bear that burden, who will help you carry it.
So beautifully said. I love that. So do you have any final advice or words of wisdom or any last things that you want to leave with our listeners on just what you went through, or any final thoughts?
Sure. I didn't talk much about this, but I mentioned a little bit about being unhappy in my ward. And if anybody who was in my ward at this time is listening, it was a great ward. They were wonderful people, but I just, for some reason, was not clicking in that ward. And now I have great friendships. Now that I'm not in that ward, I have great friendships with people who are in that ward. But one of the things that I think we could do better on in general is remembering that church is somewhere we go to give, not somewhere where we go to get. I think that people can feel unsatisfied in church a lot if we're going there expecting for people to always be reaching out to us rather than us going to reach out to someone else. If I'm sitting alone in Relief Society, I can sit and wallow and be like, why is someone not coming to sit by me? Or I can look around and figure out who else is sitting by themselves. And maybe they're feeling like I am too. And instead of, listening to the Sunday school teacher who might not be super well prepared or might not be saying all the things that I think are right or that I agree with, maybe feel grateful for the time that person spent preparing for that lesson, and let that kind of be the lens through which you interact with that person. Because the getting we get in church is when we get to go take the sacrament and when we get to feel when we get to repent for our sins and start fresh. The rest of church is about giving, and that lens helped me a lot when I was struggling with what was with interactions in my ward. So I think that helps a lot. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention is you kind of touched on this before, but seeking out the right kinds of resources, making sure, like, podcasts are great. I love this podcast, but books are important. Read books. Conference talks are important. Scriptures are important. Don't take sort of the easy way out of just like consuming content. Take some time to study, to pray, to reach out to. I mentioned Dan Peterson. He was a professor at BYU. He's retired now, but I sent him an email, and I know Leo did a similar thing when he was struggling. At BYU, I sent him an email, and he emailed me back that day. He's a busy college professor. He emailed me back that day and said, read, here's a couple books, here's a couple things, I'm in between classes, I'll get back to you soon, but and there are people who want to help. So look for good resources. So those are my two big things that I would kind of probably wrap up with.
I love that. Church is a place we go to give, not a place we go to get. That was so profound. That was amazing. Now, what books, just, as a recommendation for listeners, what books did you read that you really loved? One that I've mentioned a couple times is Faith is Not Blind. And I hope that's one that you read, because it is a game changer. It is so good.
Yeah. Faith is Not Blind is wonderful. It kind of came out after I was going through a lot of this stuff, but it is definitely probably in my top two. So that would be one. My other one is one that I think either you've mentioned on the podcast or you've posted on your Instagram, the Crucible of Doubt by the Givenses. Yes. Those are my two. Faith is Not Blind, as you've kind of mentioned, it's more of a general, it's about kind of the general process of faith, the steps that you go through. It's not necessarily about particular issues. The Crucible of Doubt is wonderful because it tackles some of these issues, like, why did Brigham Young say this thing that doesn't sound very prophet-like, and what is a prophet even? And it tackles some of those more individual specific issues. So those are the two books that I would recommend that I think are really fantastic. Another you've mentioned, I don't think I have anything new to offer you that your wonderful guests haven't already brought up, but the Stand Forever Strong devotional is excellent. So that would be and that's when it hurts, when you're struggling, because you're like, no, I want to study about polygamy. I don't. Yep. And he says, no, you need to start back from the basics. And he's exactly right, as much as it sounds like not what you want to hear.
Totally. Yep. I love that so much. And Amanda, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time and your story is so powerful. And I just love the little miracles that you mentioned that you experienced. And yeah, I just thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just love what you're doing. I love listening to your podcast every week, and it's something that I've loved sharing with people. And I hope that your listeners will, if whether they're struggling with faith themselves or want to learn better about how to minister to people with struggling, that they will join us in our Facebook group. It's Uplift Community of Faith, and we welcome people no matter where they're at in their faith, whether they're feeling super strong or having lots of doubts or just kind of in the middle. We would love you to have you join us.
Awesome. And I will link that Facebook group.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much.